Hi, everyone. We're really happy to see you all here. My name is Ela. I'm based here in Berlin. I'm co-founder of Supermarkt. It's a platform for digital culture and alternative economies that exists now in its 12th year. I also, together with Andreas, who is here, we have been co-founding Platform Cooperatives Germany. And I'm involved in a number of organizations and communities, especially here in Berlin. So the topic of governance is really dear to my heart. And I hope today with all of you that we manage to create that space for a lively exchange around governance. What does it mean for you? How does it show in your daily practice, your governance stories? So this is not about us lecturing, but this is really about exchanging and having a communication. And I pass it on to Irene, my co-host.
Hello, everybody. My name is Irene Lopez de Vallejo. I wasn't prepared to introduce myself because Ela has kindly invited me to join her in the session today. I'm with the Disco Co-op, with the crew that has developed the governance framework for distributed cooperative organizations. And we hope to have a good discussion today and a little bit of a, hands-on fun exercise. We really want to hear you and your ideas around governance and what are the things that you are doing. And I think we're going to start.
Okay, we thought for a start, let's maybe form groups of 4, and we would kindly ask you to come up with definitions for governance. What is governance to you? It can either be a working definition if you come up with that, or it can be just a word. What is governance? And please take maximum 3 minutes. Look for someone. Ideally, someone you haven't spoken with. And after that round, we hear what's governance for you. Please, no long lists. It can be short, but really try to carve out what is governance for you, essentially. 3 minutes. So, thanks, everybody, for engaging in your groups. I'm pretty sure that you just started to touch the tip of the iceberg, but nonetheless, we would kindly like to invite you to share with whatever you came up with. And I'm going to pass around the mic so each group can share their own findings. What makes governance so important? What is governance for you?
Oh no, here you go.
So I think it's difficult to come up with sum up all the thinking of all the group, but there is definitely some terms that would come together, common terms, which I would say don't take the words precisely because it's difficult to take them. I would say some sort of rules that help a group of people, an organization, to put themselves together and orienting them into a purpose, a goal, a North Star. And I think framework was the word that was kind of accepted by that was commonly coming up framework to direct people and through a certain purpose and goal, I would say.
So just to repeat, this is about directing people.
Yeah.
That's one of the key words.
Yeah, I would say maybe first starting this way is there is first a sort of culture and share of value.
Yes.
That are together and why people come together at the first place. Mm-hmm. So I would say maybe the start is finding this share of value, but I believe in that's also is super complicated with governments. The more you grow, the less you actually know people intimately, and you don't maybe have the time to share those initial value on a deeper level. So it's all to make sure that every new person joining whatever it is able to like embed it and like take part of this while having the same mindset and the same like last goal in a sense.
Okay. So we put down direction and values, and we get back to that later. Thank you. Yeah, please pass it on to the next group. What are your findings?
We started out with like governance as the expression of the need of groups to coordinate, like different individuals coordinating. An important aspect that I tend to forget is also the, how did you phrase it? The
informed decision making across all levels.
Yeah, because like this came from the background of like medicine, for example, that like the people that are coordinating should be informed like to the utmost possible, I guess. And then also they should be informed of like who is making decision making, like transparent structures of like who's actually engaging in this whole process. Did I forget anything? Yeah, like transparency of power, of course, which I include in that.
So informed decision making seems to be a very important component. And of course, the power question, right? Transparency of power, making visible who is taking the decisions and how, right?
Yeah, and of course the always like kind of complicated question of like how do we agree how to make decision making? Like so the decision making on the form of decision making, which needs to be transparent as well, of course.
Organizing decision making. Yeah.
Yes. Like if you don't have a governance system in place, then how do you decide on it if you don't have one, you know? Like, yeah.
Okay, thank you so much. Could you pass it on, please?
Hi.
Hello.
Yeah, I think if I could sum it up, we talked about shared protocols for the shared use of shared resources. And that can take many different forms, but I think that encapsulates a lot of the discussion we had. And of course, governance can be split on a lot of different dimensions, and I think we need to embrace this sort of fractalized governance where we can have social governance, technical governance, economic governance, and the appropriate sort of weighting of inputs from different parts of the network, particularly those most impacted by it. So I think these are interesting new tools that we can close the loop between stakeholders in all parts of a network and their ability to feed back on how these things evolve over time.
Okay, thank you so much. I put down shared protocol, shared usage, and shared resources. And the whole organization flows around that. Yeah, thank you. That's super useful. Please pass it on to the next group.
Hi. Thanks for organizing this. This is awesome. And we think, or we want to echo the direct values in a sense that there has to be some common or shared values, agreed upon values, including a code of conduct for participation. And also echoing what others said about decision making, I think it's important to make a distinction between consent and consensus, and the processes of how to reach one or the other should be distinctly different and communicated well. Also, I forgot the last thing, but it will come back. What did I forget?
Thank you so much. Can I just jump in with is there any need for clarification about the term consent and consensus? Is it clear for everybody, or is a clarification needed?
I think always, right?
Yeah, as always, please, would you feel comfortable to clarify these terms?
For me personally, consent is when you, for example, ask a question in a group and there's no one saying, oh my God, this is a very bad idea. And everyone's like, yeah, it kind of sounds good. Like this is like a general consent. And consensus is when you ask someone, please take a vote or pick a decision, and you have to have a finality on the decision in a form of a quorum that you defined beforehand. That is consensus. That's the difference for me.
Yeah. So the one I think the difference lies in the measurability, that consensus really is something to be measured, where really everybody agrees and commits. And I think that's also the complicated thing to organize in reality. Thank you for that.
Thank you. Community care work, I wanted to add. Thanks.
Yeah, good point. We try to pick up all your points. So therefore, this is super valuable for us. Please pass it on.
Hey, for us, I'm just gonna throw like words that came up. Okay, it's not something coherent.
Very good.
So we talked about collective decision making, or like decision making of a group or of a community. Coordination, that's another thing that came up. Cultural agreements, and collective sense making, or understanding what's happening. So as an aspect, it's not. Yeah. So these are the things that came up.
Yeah, super interesting. I think we are missing the cultural what?
Cultural agreements.
Yeah, the cultural agreements. It's interesting. You are looking at the different layers, the organizational layer. You're looking at the cultural layer, the layer of the informed decision making / sense making. So that is already that's touching a lot of ground. So
That's not. It's not something that we thought about too much. It's just us.
yeah, it just pops up.
Yeah.
It's typical for governance because it is a broad field, right? But I think it's good to sort of better understand what those different terms mean for different people, because there's always an emphasis you put on specific things when you work in any given project. So thanks for that, and yeah, please pass it on to the next group.
Yeah, you can speak. Echoing off of, we did discuss also sense making and how to decide how to make sense, and we sort of differentiated governance from both. I think speaking ahead, both sort of meta governance as an understanding of how to make sense about how to then operationally have governance about how to then enact change, and what else did we discuss? We sort of meandered around that path a little bit. Is there anything else? Yeah, deciding how to decide, and then the embedded values within that, echoing some prior comments.
So what I understand from your comment is that you have been particularly concerned around the whole navigating the complexity of preparing both informed decision making, but also the protocols for decision making. That's the sense making, but it's also looking at different possibilities of taking decisions. And that is really, to me, that's this whole field of navigation before you actually get to that point.
And reorienting and
reorientate
assessment in progress, and not just a single.
Yeah, very good
single
point.
direction.
Yeah, I really believe that's part of the governance work, to allow for enough time and space for that to happen. Yeah, thank you. Please pass it on. Thank you.
So we have discovered that governance has to do with communication and with steering, but also that it has its tools and frameworks for having every voice heard and make people participate. And then we pretty soon looked into into the practice and discovered that it's quite difficult sometimes in the different settings where we work. For example, in co-ops, where you are obliged to a certain voting mechanism according to law, and on the other hand, you want to run consensus and consent-making mechanisms. So yeah, it's a difficult thing.
And Caroline also added that point of the difference between consent and consensus. So we were also talking about the difference between consent and consensus, and that it would be so much more nice to take decisions from the point of having consensus where everyone is agreeing on what to do and not that there is a consent and you want to participate or you're not participating. That point where you're not participating, Carolina said that you're actually not heard and that your voice just drops because you're against the minority in a way, majority, yes.
Yeah, super complex field indeed. Is this yet another group?
Yeah.
Okay, I just quickly want to comment on that. I think two really important things. So Andreas, you are already referring to the world of, let's say, technical frameworks and solutions for decision making and governance, which we often find, of course, in Web3 environments, DAOs particularly. And then there is this reminder that capturing members' will and sentiment is far more nuanced than what we often see in binary voting, because there is much more to that. And then it's the question of, first of all, how to make sure that we hear everyone's voice, but also how to provide more nuances for decision-making than what we currently have. Yeah, thank you so much. Really good points. Please.
We were coming from a different angle a little bit, because in the beginning we were wondering about, okay, governance refers also to rules, and who is actually giving the rules? Are they internally established or are they coming from outside? And yeah, this was our question a little bit, also regarding self-censorship. Am I individually responsible for governance? Is it someone else? And you also had a point, did I say that? Okay, yeah.
That governance, what comes to mind first is a bit enforced from externally and you have to comply, even though you didn't give these rules to yourself maybe.
Yeah, I think that's super interesting because that's very often not discussed, but these frictions that occur when there is external governance, like for instance legal frameworks. Andreas also referred to it in the cooperative world. There is a quite strong legal framework on how voting can happen, but then the governance that comes from within and changing governance needs, because they are changing. It's not like a static thing, of course. So thanks for coming up with that, because it's really also a reminder of that. No matter when we think of we have found the right system in terms of governance or voting, then it can happen that only shortly after we realize it's not ideal and there are still things that have to be developed. And I think looking at a lot of our democracies and democratic decision-making, elections, etc., we see in many different countries, we see a need to sort of reform that and discuss about that. So thanks for that as well. So I think looking at, like this is now, that's what everyone came up with in a nutshell. I think we have covered a lot of ground here of what governance is, can be, or how you experience governance in your daily life and work. Question, is there anything that comes up in your mind where you feel, oh, we didn't talk about that at all? Is there anything missing, you think?
I don't know if we can include that in sort of value, but it's like maybe try to include the limitation. Like when is governance limited and like what type of governance maybe fits different type of groups. Because maybe, one type of governance is going to work really well until like you're 10. And then when you're 100, it's going to be another type. And then if you're a whole nation, it's another type. And then when you're a whole planet, it's like even something different. So maybe like, diversing the type of governance that need to be used.
Yeah, thank you. Good point. So this is really about the evolution of governance and the fact that it constantly changes. Just as in relationships, social protocols are changing depending on how people develop. oh, please, there is another point.
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure if it has been mentioned, but the whole question of hierarchy and does everybody have equal voting powers? Also, like, what is the membrane of the body that is being governed? And what are the stakes, for example? And is voting power like tied to stakes? Yeah.
Yeah, that's super interesting because it comes from a structural field, and of course has its has its meaning then in the protocols of how governance actually takes place. I'm sure we could find many more things, but since time is a little bit limited, we thought, let's first of all hear everybody. Let's engage in some collective thinking around governance. And then, since Irene is here and she represents the DISCO team, Distributed Cooperative Organizations, it's really, it's a perfect situation, perfect moment to profit from all the thinking that the DISCO team has been doing. And since I also have worked with them and for them in the past couple of years, we thought we would like to introduce you a little bit more to the DISCO principles, because the DISCO team has been working for years on principles for governance. And what we would like to do now in this second half of our session, we would like to present you the 7 DISCO principles and hear your opinion on it. And then in the end, we're going to wrap it up and you can figure out for yourself what is missing or maybe where these principles might not be enough and where you have to add something. That would be our goal for this session. And I want to pass it on to you, Irene, please.
Hello, hello, yeah. And if you cannot hear me very well, just do something like, please, because between my Spanish accent and closer, like this, okay. We only have half an hour and we wanted to do something a little bit longer, a little bit more hands-on, and hear the opinions of all the collectives that we know are in this space at the moment. But what we are going to do is we're going to run you very quickly through what is DISCO. Some of you know more than others, and then talk about the 7 principles. When I talk about the 7 principles, please think about your own groups and your own collectives and try to grab what each principle might mean for you, because that would be the Q&A that we want to run at the very end. So we have half an hour. I'm Spanish. If I speak too quickly, just wave or something. And if you don't understand me, I don't know what to do. I can repeat. There is something that you need to know. DISCO comes from practice. So the DISCO framework emerges from the practices of a group called Guerrilla Media Collective, a group of translators. They've been experimenting with a number of practices and tools for the last 8 years. So DISCO emerges from practice. That is the first thing you need to know. We get a lot of questions about DISCO. We talk to a lot of people that are looking at the framework and then have doubts. And I have to say that DISCO is an incubator for new economic models and experimentation. We are proposing a new work ethic. We believe it's a safe space in a sea of decentralization. DISCO is culture and a structure, and DISCO is a provocation. We're putting it out there for others to look at it and say, can we do this? Yes, you can do this. DISCO is not a specific or universal legal form. DISCO is not a legal form. Yeah, is very, very important. DISCO is not a deterministic framework. We propose modules, we propose steps, we propose a journey. DISCO is not exclusionary in terms of technology. So it's not a super techie initiative. So it's for the people that are not techies. to implement. It's not speculative from a financial perspective, and it's not an academic exercise. Yeah. DISCO stands for Distributed Cooperative Organizations, promotes cooperative, commons-oriented and feminist ways of working. So we are talking about work. These principles, we believe, come alive better in small federated communities of up to 20 people. DISCOs use technology but are not DISCO-centric, so people are at the forefront of the decision-making, and mutual support and trust-based relationships are core to the model. The 7 DISCO principles, here we go. First one, values-based accountability. Yeah, in DISCOs, production is driven by need, including social and environmental needs. So the group that needs to, the group that comes together and wants to implement this needs to think about this very carefully. What are the values, shared values that are driven, that drive that community project? Second principle, DISCOs build whole community governance. What does that mean? That DISCOs extend the rights of ownership and decision-making powers to all those affected by that organization's activities. Yeah? Sorry? DISCO. Yeah. DISCO is a governance framework and tools for organizations to run themselves following these 7 principles that I'm explaining. Yeah? And it's a set of open source tools that we are developing. Not quite there yet, I have to say. So building whole community governance involves including all the people that work with that DISCO or organization. Yeah, it can be neighboring communities, it can be backers, it can be clients, it can be funders, those that work with the DISCO around their mission. Principle 3, DISCOs are active creators of commons. DISCOs generate open access resources, for example, infrastructure, code, knowledge, documentation, best practices, design. Principle 4, DISCOs rethink global and local economics. Physical production is kept local, but knowledge and resources and values are shared globally with other organizations that implement the DISCO principles. 5th principle. Care work is core. Care practices are core to the model, and those organizations implement care practices as part of their work, usual work practices. We believe that individual members need to look after themselves, they need to be looked after the rest of the community, and care practices need to be extended to that wider community of a network where the DISCOs operate. So care work is core, it's very important. This is a very important principle. Principle 6, DISCOs and organizations that apply DISCO. I'm so sorry, yeah, I said I was Spanish, speak very quickly. Yeah, so principle number 6, DISCOs are organizations that reimagine the origin and flows of value. We propose that to look at work and the value produced by organizations as 3 different types of value. We talk about the market value, so livelihood work. We talk about commons creating value that we call love work, and care work value. And these are tracked in the daily practices, work, activities of the organization, of the DISCO, of the association, of the collective. And the last one, DISCOs are designed to be federated, are primed for federation. So it comes from the design standpoint. DISCOs are intended to federate their the value they produce and the value flows along those 3 main areas. And that's the 7th principle. I did that in 10 minutes. So we have 20. Pardon? about federation. Okay, this is look at this, the 7 principles. What we are proposing to organizations and communities that are looking into implementing the DISCO framework. We are proposing a journey, so a 7-step journey. And the federation comes sort of like at the very end because there are not many DISCOs around. I mean, the 2 actual functional DISCOs are Guerrilla and ourselves, disco.coop. Yeah, there are other DISCOs that are adopting the principles and that they are at different stages in that journey. So federation is something that we imagine and we are designing for, but it's not something that we can say it's happening. Yeah, what we envision is the federation of those value flows and exchanges in a DISCO-verse of organizations that operate through a Web3 layer.
I think it's a great framework. I think I've already learned a lot what you can do in terms of connecting it to.
Thank you.
Connecting it to other organizations. No, I was wondering because we have a group here in Berlin called the Donut Berlin, and I was wondering if you are already in touch with the Donut Economics Action Lab, because in terms of federation, that would be of interest. There is a lot of donut groups all over the world that could maybe tear this in a very, because I think the CARES core is absolutely brilliant. We don't have that to that extent because we come from this economical perspective of redefining economy as being within the center, basically, of the donut, and really working towards the social justice, which is at the core. But this as a structural framework, I think it fits to the donut. So that's all, basically.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, we need to talk. I think we are in touch with some of the groups, but I don't know exactly who. Thank you.
Yeah, I just get one question, like, what was the process, how did you work, or did you end up to find those like 7 principles? What did you use, or did you do it, and or did you use some sort of characteristic, feature, like, okay, that's what we want to be included in like a governance, and then you say, okay, this principle, yes, no, what was the work behind all of these principles?
Yeah, I think it's really good that you ask, because DISCO is all about practice. So Irene said that in the beginning. So this process of finding out about these things that are of importance, they come from the work with Guerrilla Media Collective. That's the collective of translators that work together in a decentralized manner, mainly online. They have been doing this for years, and they figured out from the practice of working together what it actually means to be sure that the work is being accounted for, that the contributions of people are made visible. They learned the hard way what care work means in a community that is dispersed, where people are not in the same room. So all of that, I think, is a collection of things that turned out to be essential along the way. And what DISCO proposes is not like these 7 principles, they apply for a DISCO. But now what I would like to do is also to look at the things you came up with. And maybe, if we do this sense making together, maybe figuring out what is obvious and what is more sitting underneath and what is maybe not so obvious. And I think why so many people talk about DISCO, or also like the DISCO example, or maybe question it, I don't know, is because DISCO really tries to put to the forefront also the complex stuff that we do not really have answers to, and that is core work. So here, it's in a nutshell, it's the livelihood, it's the love and the care, because also from everything we have discussed now, we did not talk about livelihood or motivation, but I think it's essential. And when we talk about activist groups or, groups of people who want to do stuff together, there's always the question of who is able to do it, to spend time for it, who is privileged enough in order to put their time and energy into. And I think these are the things we think are obvious, but they are super difficult to handle. So I hope this answers your questions.
Yeah, it probably does. Just maybe one thing to add on that is like, on a personal belief, I think like each principle you base is purely on your objective. You know, like each objective gonna have different principles. So what was the objective in your mind when you were choosing these principles?
Yeah.
Because the way I hear your question is how the group started experimenting with. So when you want to work in the way that Ela was describing, group of translators, decentralized, I mean, living in different locations in Spain, in different parts of Europe, in different parts of the world, bringing their efforts together to make a living, yeah, because people need to pay bills, that type of thing. And they started to experiment with different practices. They started to look at feminist economics and how can that be applied in a workplace, yeah, in this organization, open value accounting, how we're going to account for the 3 different types of values that we want to work towards. So they came together to do translations for free, so that was a lot of work, of pieces of work that were not being translated by anybody for commercial purposes. So they wanted to put ideas out there, so contributing to the knowledge, global knowledge commons. And then care practices were very important because people feel super isolated when they work in a distributed manner. We do, yeah. I'm so happy to be here with Ela and with Andreas. We work a lot on the digital space. We hadn't met for, years. I mean, it's crazy. So how do you keep up spirits? How do you look after people that tend to be depressed when they are working on their own? Not everybody likes it. So it's responding to very, very practical needs of that specific group. And at some point after the years and making a lot of mistakes, I mean, making like mistakes, experimenting with these things, financial mistakes, accounting mistakes, legal mistakes, people managing mistakes, DISCO emerged as a practical framework. So what you are seeing here, I have presented in 10 minutes. It's like is the failure and success of a group of people that were brave enough to bring their efforts together. Yeah, and it's really the commons, inspirations, the commons, feminist economics, open value accounting, and open cooperativism. So those 4, let's say, movements or trends together, bringing things from those 4 is the DNA of DISCO. Now, experimentation and practice is super important because the groups that we are working with look at those 7 values and have very, very different responses and very different ideas on what is that, what does it mean for them, and how they are going to actually track it, because tracking is essential for the model. Someone was, yes, you. Sorry, and then Caroline, yeah.
Sure. So the session is on federating, at least part of it. And so what's coming to mind for me right now is how are we federating the DISCO so far, and is cosmo-localism a part of that in any way, shape, or form, such that we can have local collectives of DISCOs and other regenerators, and they can be based in one place and different collectives based in another, and we're trying to have those cross-pollinate these learnings. How is this emerging?
I can give you an answer. Probably Ela can give you another answer. Some of the people that are working with us can give you a different answer. I would say what you said is fine. I mean, it is a yes. That is happening. The other things that are happening are we are asking the groups that are working with us at the moment. We call them DISCO Labs. It's a group of. It's a program for organizations that are taking this journey. We support them on their. It's a co-creation process, and what we are asking is that their contribution to the commons is actually documenting their journey. So how do they tackle the 7 principles? What values are driving the collective? What are the things that they are doing around their wider ecosystem? How do they contribute to the commons? How do they rethink the global, local? They don't have to answer everything. How do they do care practices? Care is super important. What care practices they want to implement and they commit to, yeah? And that is out there for all the other discos in the world to take examples and use. And it's a continuous kind of like, it's an open source conspiracy. It's a continuous hacking process, because I haven't said this, but we are a non-profit, pure commons contributor organization, and that's what we want. That's what we want. Yeah.
Dan, I know you have the mic, but in fact, Carolina was first, so I would. Yeah, I forgot about that, but you'll be second.
Thank you. So for your question, what are the not so obvious things that come to my mind? One is the unconscious biases and the influence in decision making, like the interpersonal unconscious power dynamics, and how like can we take that into consideration. And the other thing is, how can we transport these models which are very much being or starting to being applied in smaller scale organizations to like the upper level of like, you know, whole nations or whatever. And it came to my mind the Rojava revolution, you know, and yeah, are you in touch with any of them? Because I think it would be really interesting to, in parallel, be talking to people in doing more or less the same, trying to reinvent a system of governance, but at a much wider scale and in a completely different context. So yeah, just food for thought. Yeah.
Yeah. Really good point. Through the Circles team, we are connected to many of these groups and human rights groups, and it's really true. It's really about exchanging those findings and allowing for intercooperation. Because otherwise, if you do that in an isolated manner, it's super complicated. And yeah, thanks for reminding us of that. Dan, pass it on to you.
Very interesting point about the influencing and decision making subconsciously. I get back to that maybe later. For how we are federating or how it should be done, this will be, as you mentioned, a very hands-on approach. Many are taking a different angle when it comes to it, but how I see it or how I design communities or system when I think them up is that these principles, they are sort of like the gene code of the disco. And when you federate, you split the cell and you give the gene code, so the principles stay the same, but what you make out of them and what you interpret with them is up to the federated disco itself. So yeah, that's how I think that design is made to be, could be. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm interested in more points, like looking at what we came up with. Is there anything you feel like missing, or if you think of your own organization, of your own work, is there anything you would like to add to this list of propositions and principles? Is there anything we have not captured yet?
I'm really intrigued by care is core, and you know, it dawned on me how much that has been eroded in our global society now, and I was just curious about your how you translate the meaning of care. That's
an excellent question, and I would say a very difficult one to answer. I can tell you what we do, and maybe some of the people that are in the room that are thinking about this can give you some other examples. So, for example, we have a daily check-in. We have we use Mattermost, and every morning everybody does a check-in around 5 points. We use a software to Mattermost. And we just say, what did we do yesterday? What are we doing today? How we show up today? What are we going to do for well-being? What are the blocks that we are experimenting? And what are we grateful for? And with that, in a very quick, super fast, we know how everybody's showing up for the day. And I have to say that I come from a very kind of like different type of environment. So I've worked for many, many years for just the opposite type of organizations. And actually coming to work with Disco and learning the whole thing and practicing it has been eye-opening. It changed me massively. I couldn't be grateful, for example, at the beginning. I just like, what is, so, and I was thinking, so it's practicing. It is really, I mean, if you've never done it, how do you show gratefulness? It's like, think about it. And then saying, what are my blocks? Do I have to share? So trust, I did mention trust, but trust is super important. So what is developed in these small groups are trust relationships. You come to know the other people so well and their rhythms, which is not necessarily always good. And I'm not, your point was towards the bias and the power dynamics. It is a very good point because different people have different personalities. Some are more forceful than others. And how do you check and balance all those different personalities? So you have to actually make room for the voices of everybody, and you have to learn that. And you have to learn to communicate in a non-violent manner if you want to express dissent. But you have to learn to do that and use those tools in your daily practice. Care, too much care, or care misunderstood can also be very toxic. Can actually be very, very toxic because we've seen it, we've experienced it. And taken to the extreme, I mean, so we are not the psychologist of the rest of the thing. It's not about that. It's about communication and openness and how are you? And I hope you're fine. If you're not fine, I'm covering up for you. Take a rest. But I'm not gonna go into psychoanalyzing you and your problems, for example. It's a balance, and we are not basically trained for that in a workplace, yeah? Other examples, I don't know, do you have other examples? Yeah?
Would you mind repeating the 5 points? So it's like blockers, gratitude.
What did I do yesterday? How I'm showing up today.
Okay.
Blocks, if any. Well-being, what are we gonna do to look after ourselves? And then gratitude. What are we grateful for today?
Thank you.
And also, this is really about a daily practice. It's not just once per week because, and I really want to mention that. So what Irene is talking about is livelihood. This is about a project where people actually base their, I mean, it's your job, right? So this is not just about, engaging in something in your leisure time, but this is about redefining the way you work, the way you make money, the way you collaborate. And that's also, I guess, that's the complexity behind. So we're coming to an end now. It's 5:30. And I hope that, I mean, we've come a long way together with all the stuff you came up with the examples Irene gave us from Disco. Many, many thanks to all of you who have attended, and see you around.
Thank you very much.